Hi, and welcome back to the European VC, the go-to podcast for everything European VC. If you love the show, share it with your friends and join our newsletter at eu.vc.
All right, Andreas. So now we're at our second SuperAngel podcast episode, which, as we said when launching the first one, we've decided to feature here on the EUVC pod.
Yeah, and I love this one. In it, we were actually joined by Keith Grose, who we also had the pleasure to meet in person for our Gaggle Blaster event a couple of weeks back in London.
And I have to disclose, I didn't see him. I guess the office was full. I guess there was too many people. Super happy to hear that, though.
Yeah, busy indeed. All right, but let's get into it and set the context for everyone. You're listening to this episode because we got a bunch of learnings from this, as well as all the other SuperAngel podcast. And I just want to ask you, David, what was your main takeaways?
A core takeaway that I took out of it, at least, which was this concept of founder allocation, right? When thinking about portfolio construction, not necessarily thinking about the deals and, the sectors and the verticals and the geos, whatever, but more thinking of it as my time is extremely limited. And as an angel, there's a limited amount of time that I can also dedicate with the investments I make. So thinking of time as the anti-commodity and optimizing for how I spend my time and with whom I spend my time.
All right, we will not bore your ears more or tire your ears more with our voices. We will let you listen to this episode where I and Anthony Dannon from Cocoa dive into angel investing with Keith Grose.
Doo-doo-doo.
Is this a dream?
No, it's not a dream. I'm an angel.
Why would God send me an angel?
Because God knows that everyone needs a little coaching now and then.
I'm loving angels. I saw an angel. All angels say from you sent me an angel. The smile on her face.
Be in it together, but don't hold me, angel.
Been touched by an angel, girl.
Hi, and welcome to the SuperAngel podcast, the go-to podcast for angels backing the next generation of European unicorn founders. If you love our show, do drop us a review, share it with your friends, and join our community at eu.vc. Today, we're happy to welcome Keith, Head of International for Plaid, an open finance platform and data network that powers over 3,000 digital financial apps and more than 12,000 financial institutions across the US, Canada, UK, and Europe. As well as this, Keith leads the strategy and operations for Plaid's international products. If you're an angel listening in and wanting to get closer to the European angel scene, do not hesitate to reach out to us. We'd love to connect and see how we can play together. And now, some words from our beloved sponsors. How are you currently reporting to your LPs? Is fund administration taking hours? Are you getting lost in spreadsheet version control? Well, Flow solves all of these issues and more, allowing you to unlock the power of your fund's data by consolidating your work streams onto Flow. Book a demo to learn about Flow's portfolio and fund management features and transaction infrastructure at flow.io/VC. flow.io/VC. Investors are turning to new relationships as we continue to face challenges in a downturn. Join Expand North Star to discover Dubai, the UAE, and the rise of the Global South ecosystems. Gain insights on market access opportunities and the latest on ADGM, Mubadala, and Catalyst Partners, as well as how DFDF are transforming the global investment landscape with a $1 billion target for assets under management by the end of 2024. You'll connect with the people driving the UAE's digital economy to grow more than $140 billion in 2031. And Dubai's recently announced ambitious $8.7 trillion economy agenda for the next decade, known as D33. Register now at expandnorthstar.com/EUVC.
Keith, welcome to the SuperAngel podcast. We are so excited to have you with us.
Thank you. It's so great to be here. Thank you for having me, Andreas and Anthony.
Thanks for being Keith. And, actually we've co-invested in a bunch of deals together with Keith. So I'm so excited to have him here. And, I do think he's one of the strongest commercial product operators I know and bring quite a refreshing US experience to the European ecosystem. So yeah, again, thank you. Thank you for joining us.
Of course. It's great to be here.
Would love to start, like, hearing a bit, for the listeners, right? Your backstory, what got you into operating, what got you into Plaid, and then angel investing, or the technology ecosystem as a whole.
Yeah, I'll go way back for this. And so stop me if I go too far back. But I've really always loved early stage tech since I was in high school. So I went to basically a boarding school for nerds in the US. It was called the School of Science and Math. Our mascot was the unicorns. But I was surrounded by this environment where everyone was like, what's the latest thing that's being built, the latest thing coming out? We always got the popular science magazine. And so I really fell in love with tech from that point on. And that's what led me to move to Silicon Valley after university and start my career there. It was really at Google, though, where I started to get into fintech and infrastructure. So I worked on expanding and building out what became their fintech products. So Google Pay API Suite and the Google Wallet app, and really started to see under the covers, if you want to build a great consumer experience, the infrastructure that you have to build is very intense and there's a lot of complications around it. And so I started falling in love with solving those problems. And ultimately, that's what led me to Plaid. If people aren't familiar, it's an open banking platform. So it's an infrastructure layer that supports lots of other fintech applications. And I joined to help them expand their offering to Europe for the first time. And so while it wasn't a founder experience, it was almost a mini founder experience because I had to set up a new entity, payroll, operations, compliance, build out the product, then scale the go-to-market team. And now it's a multi-million ARR business and off and running. And so I went through that journey. And over that journey, I started to have other people who were doing international expansion or building fintech products start to ask me for advice. How did you handle this? What did you think about scaling your organization in this way? And that's how I really fell into angel investing, is really through supporting people who are going through a similar experience that I've been through. And so I almost think of angel investing as evolution in that sense. You're taking your learnings and trying to help another founder be more successful by supporting them with what you know and the problems and successes that you've seen along the way. So that's sort of a little bit of my journey, if that's helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. That's fantastic. And, I do find that angel investing is a way of actually ensuring you have a continuous relationship with those people in some respects, right? And in a way that's aligned. But now tell me a bit more about any favorite deals, I mean, first of all, how many have you been doing? Tell us a bit more about your angel investments, but also any favorites you want to share with the listeners would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. I started out angel investing through syndicates and platforms like AngelList, and then moved into doing direct deals and supporting founders that I knew directly. I think a few of my favorite deals, and I've probably now at this point done somewhere around 40 angel investments over the past basically 3 years. So relatively active. Probably my favorite deal is Ramp Network, which is a crypto on-ramp. And again, you're very familiar with them as well. But I've just loved Simon and the team that he's been building. The grit that they bring and what they've built as a business is incredible. And so just seeing the speed at which they execute, and also the chip on their shoulders is something I've now started to look for in other founders. I really want to see that grit when I talk to someone early stage, because you're going to go through so many ups and downs if you're founding a company, that I think that's the number one quality that I look for. And so Ramp Network is probably my favorite deal I've ever done. And then another deal I'll mention is supporting people that I've seen sort of go through working with me and then leave and build their own company. And so I also invested in Stitch, which is ex-Plaid alums founding an authentication startup in the US. And I think it's so exciting to watch people that you've known and seen grow go on to become their own fantastic founders. So those two deals stick out for me as ones that are really have a sort of special place for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you go back, right, and look through the experience of the 40 investments you've done to date, what would you say angel investing has given you, or something you wouldn't have expected even that it might have given you, whether professionally or personally?
Yeah, I think a few things there. One is it's helped me crystallize my own experience and learnings. Like I think I almost think of the way you would think about it if you're writing your own business book or something. If you actually have to share your ideas and your experience with someone else, it makes you think through, why did I make these decisions? Why did I structure things this way? And makes you reevaluate and have a more clarity about your own experience. And then the second thing I would say there is actually building an amazing network and sort of friendship group out of this angel investing process. For me, I really love to be on WhatsApp level communication, texting back and forth with the founders I invest in, introducing the people I think they should know. And so oftentimes whenever they come through London, or if they're in London, I meet up with them, and you really start to actually develop a great relationship beyond just an investor or angel relationship. And so I think it's a great way to build a fintech community and to embed yourself in that fintech community. I think that's probably one of the things I've enjoyed the most.
I'd love to just double click on that, because now you said that fintech community, and you're obviously building yourself in the fintech world as well. Do you stick to that sector? Is that how you think about it, or what is the strategy?
Yeah, because I like to think of it as well from the founder's perspective, right? Like, you're not just investing in a founder is investing in you. They're giving you a piece of what they're building in exchange for something. So what are you bringing to the table there? And so I like to invest in companies where I know I can add value. And for me, that's very clearly fintech, crypto, B2B companies, and in particular, API-based businesses where you have to think through, how do you structure your go-to-market motion? How do you think about pricing? How do you think about verticalizing your customers, things that I've gone through myself. And so I do tend to do 95% of my investments in the crypto and fintech space, just simply because I feel like that's where the exchange of value is best, because I can bring a lot to the table for founders there.
The good news is, and maybe that's self-serving because many people will know I'm a bit of a fintech nerd, but I say fintech is everything. So in some respects, it's quite a horizontal and it touches in so many industries. So it's quite a broad thesis in itself, I would assume. So it's great.
Absolutely. I'm also a believer that every company will become a fintech company at some point. Every tech company will become a fintech company at some point. So it does offer a lot of a broad platform to invest there.
But then you're giving me the stage here to invite you up and dance all over crypto, because right now we're recording this at the time where I think everyone is thinking, what the hell is going on? Could we just dive deep there for 1 second and let you start, Keith? How do you talk to your founders right now through the turmoil going on in the market?
I think, it's definitely the depths of crypto winter right now, right? But I think if you're building something of value, especially something that's infrastructure, it's going to go through multiple market cycles. And so I always tell people that actually down markets are the best time to build, because you're less distracted. There's less well-funded competitors popping up around you. This is the time to focus on you and your team. And I also think it provides healthy prioritization and discipline. You have to make hard trade-offs that sometimes in a boom market you might not have had to make. And that actually, I think, is a very healthy cycle for any startup to go through. Crypto just happens to seem to go through that every 18 months, but that's also because it's early as an ecosystem. And so it's going through this, hype and drop cycle. I think the other thing here, though, is it's really important. And I also think about this in the companies in crypto that I invest in, that I'm not investing in something that's built on speculation or hype. Like, what is the actual real value here? And so a lot of what I'm focused on investing on is people that are building bridges between traditional financial infrastructure and the web, and which I think is really where crypto stands out and builds amazing value. And also that you're helping build something that's actually going to add things to people's lives. And so I do think there are companies in crypto that are doing that and that will continue to do that. I'm still a long-term believer in the space, even though obviously right now with the recent FTX news, it's definitely a tough time. I think also good founders are just keeping their heads down and staying focused on the long-term goal.
I will come back to this subject because I think it's not necessarily crypto, but fintech and how you, as a specialist in that sector, acts as an angel. But maybe just before we dive really deep, let's get an overview of your investment strategy and thesis and so on. Kind of share with us how you think about your portfolio allocation and that kind of thing.
Oh no, it's not about the thesis.
First of all, the way I think about it is what percentage of sort of how I think about my entire net worth am I comfortable putting into angel investing? Because I also like to think of angel investing as there's a very low likelihood of really positive outcomes. So you're doing it, you need to be doing it as a way to build an ecosystem, to provide value to other founders, to build a network beyond just the investing side of it. And so, obviously you're not putting 50% of your net worth into angel investing. I think that's a bad decision for anyone. But then I also am thinking about from that perspective, I'm always more focused on the founder allocation. Which of these founders that I speak to am I going to be willing to spend hours of my time with, and why? And that's where I invest accordingly. So I almost think of it in that way. Like, if you have limited hours in a day, how would you structure your day? Because I think a lot of angel investing, the value that founder is going to get out of you is having access to you and your knowledge and what you bring to the table. And so I allocate my portfolio in that sense, almost like time-based. Who would I want to dedicate the most time to? and invest accordingly in that way.
And maybe given that, I wouldn't ask you for your net worth and ask you how much money are you putting, but I will ask you for your time worth and how much time are you dedicating to angel investing.
Yeah, I would say I probably speak to these days 2 to 3 founders a week, and I'm probably doing something like 10 investments a year. And so sometimes these are founders that just are reaching out for very different reasons, or they just want to talk about Plaid or something else. But that's probably the number of investments that I'm doing. But I speak to founders all the time.
I actually really like that notion of like thinking about the quantity of deals that you're making versus the amount of time you have to dedicate to them. As a funny tidbit, like I remember there was, and I'm not going to name any names, but like it's a founder that actually had a very active investment strategy who had optimized for, let's say, volumes for capturing potentially the best outcomes. And he told me that he suddenly realized that literally his whole weekends are wiped out on clearing out WhatsApp messages from his 150 plus investments, right? So it's definitely something for the listeners and other angels to take into consideration.
And Keith, do touch more on that, because I think that it is an interesting concept of managing time, and that is in the end the most precious resource that all of us have. So do dive a bit into how you think about that, and also how do you ensure that you attribute your time to where you really see it being valuable and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think it depends on the stage of company, the space they're in, and where I feel like my experience is going to line up with their needs. Then the other thing, one of the questions I always ask founders I talk to is, what are you hoping to get out of this? How do you want to work with me? And there are some founders who say, look, I know I'm going to have these 3 problems. I'm going to write out a memo of how I'm thinking about it, and I'm going to send you this doc. And if you could just spend the Sunday afternoon putting in your thoughts and comments here, that would be great. There are other founders who say, look, let's just exchange WhatsApps, and they'll shoot me a text on the fly whenever they have a question one-off that takes 5 minutes here or there. So you really have to talk with founders and say, look, how do you want to work with me? And there are some who say, I'll contact you when I need you, and I never hear from them again. So there is this range of how much a founder wants to use you or doesn't want to use you. I just make sure that I'm very upfront about that, and we share this relationship and understanding, because I do think of it like a friendship. And I think of it as, I'm going to be willing to invest time here. If I'm writing you a check, it's because I'm willing to spend at least a couple of hours a month talking to you and helping you work through problems. And I think the bigger the opportunity size I see, the more time I'm going to be willing to spend with you, the bigger check I'm going to be willing to write as well.
When you then decide to invest, and do you then typically also, do you lead the rounds / lead an angel syndicate, or do you typically co-invest with multiple others? And how do you think about SPVs? Are you happy to join into those, or would you rather go direct?
I never want to lead the round, because I want to be a supporting force, not the driving force in a company, is the way I think about it. And typically I do invest with other angels. I have gone through SPVs just because sometimes from a founder's perspective, that is the easiest way to manage the investment itself and the paperwork. And I'm happy to do that from a syndicate. But I also think founders get the most value out of me when they know me one-on-one. And I do find that I have more of that one-on-one relationship if I'm investing directly or co-investing alongside one other angel versus going through a syndicate or SPV where there's many angels gathering together into one investment. So my preference is to invest solo or alongside just a couple of angels directly versus a broader syndicate, because I think that's where founders know you one-on-one and have more of an impetus to reach out to you for questions they have.
And how do you source deals? Because we're going to have many listeners that primarily rely on, let's say, either their personal network, or they rely on an angel club they're part of, or, how do you think about that? And also, if you could add some words to the different routes or channels of deal flow.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's changed over time. I think a big part of my role over the past 4 years has been building Plaid's presence in Europe. And that has led to me being very visible. I'm always at conferences, I'm doing speaking, I'm doing podcasts. And so I actually tend to have a lot of deal flow of founders reaching out to me just because they've been trying to figure out some problem and they've gone to a conference to hear a talk that I've done, or they've looked up some podcast I did talking about fintech. And so actually a lot of it comes inbound from just having this presence that I've built in the ecosystem itself. And then the other way is actually from events in London again, this sort of is how I started out building my fintech ecosystem and relationships with the ecosystem here in London. I would go to hackathons. I would go to fintech drink events. I'm always present. And I have to meet people one-on-one there who are thinking about starting a company. And then a year, 6 months down the road, when they are ready for that, they reach out and say, hey, I'm thinking about taking this step. How do you approach it? Or I'm launching a new market and taking on a new role. Can you talk me through how you thought about launching markets at Plaid? Things like that. So for me, it's always been sort of building that network and ecosystem and being open for people to find you wherever they are. I would say probably 30 to 40% of my deals are cold inbounds coming off of LinkedIn. Another 30, 40% are referrals from other friends in the ecosystem who say you should talk to Keith for this particular problem. And then 20% of them are people that I reach out to or that I see are building something and I say, hey, let's talk.
It's interesting. Anthony, do you want to attach any comments to that?
Well, my take is very simple. Is I'm glad to be hanging out with people like Keith, so I can have people like Keith being sourcing deals for us, right? No, not too much to add to that. I will say that the earlier stage you go, the more unscalable it is to source, and the closer you are to operator networks, to founder networks, the closer you have a visible superpower, the better it is to be either a magnet or to be in the flow of the very interesting people, right? And so you can be systematic and say, I source X amount from VCs and Y amount from founders. But in the end of the day, I think it's a lot about the personal brand as well and kind of magnifying that. And that's, I think, a way you can scale that beyond. For us, it is like many other funds. I think what really works with Cocoa is we are an angel fund. We don't step on anyone's toes. So on top of what usually funds get, we also have VCs actively referring us very good deals rather than, their third, fourth, fifth, at best when you're competing. And also our positioning versus other funds is a lot about helping the founders before they're ready to pitch to the XVC even, right? And so we want to be Keith's recommendation to his ex-colleague before he goes out to talk to the tier one VCs he wants to pitch to, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Keith, I have two questions that I want to ask you before we get to your core learnings from your time as an angel investor. And the first question is, you mentioned that, I think you used the phrasing that when founders come through London, so that means, okay, they're not always in London. So how do you think about doing deals internationally?
Again, I always go back to, can I relate my knowledge to the experience this founder is going to be going through? So I'm happy to do international deals as long as I understand the product or market they're going after. Or if it's within the fintech and crypto space, and I feel like, especially B2B infrastructure, where I know that my understanding and knowledge is going to translate into value for them, even if it's in a different geographic location. And when I say come through London, actually, a lot of founders, especially in post-COVID area, are very mobile or digital nomads, or they actually spend most of their time in a different country in Europe. But everyone has to come to London because it's such a hub for fintech. And so I think if you're a founder in fintech, you are in London at least a couple of times a year for one reason or another. And that's where I always make sure that I make myself available for founders when they're in this ecosystem. But I'm happy to do international investments. And I think, again, a lot of where I add value is having led international expansion now at multiple companies. I can really bring a lot to the table for international founders that are thinking about, how do I come to the UK? Or I've started my company in Europe. How do I bring it to the US? That's actually a place where my experience is really relevant for founders.
And now you are on a call with a VC and a guy who does LP syndicates into VCs. So I, of course, have to ask you the question, how do you think about collaborating with VCs? How do you use them in your own, network and angel investing? And also, if you've invested into funds, how do you use funds as a sparring partner there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think VCs are incredibly important for the growth of the tech ecosystem, but especially the fintech ecosystem. Just the types of businesses you're building here are by nature going to need VC funding to get to scale. They're scale businesses almost always. And so you really need to trust VCs because you're going to need them. You're going to need to rely on them. And I feel like it the same way. I love to work again with people like Anthony that I know are on the founder's side, but also are going to bring a ton of stuff to the table that I can't bring for founders. And so that's where I always think about VCs and referring founders to VCs is I know where I can add value, There are a lot of places where a VC is going to add a lot more value than me on particular topics. Having, a Rolodex of VCs that you trust, that you can bring to the table in deals, I think is critical to be a really successful angel investor, and ultimately will be better for the founder too. And the other way I think about that for myself is I want to be the safe space for the founder as an operator. And so I want to be the person that a founder can come to if they're dealing with a really big issue or they're struggling with something that they maybe don't want to tell their lead investor. I should be the safe space for that. And the VC should be the person you should talk to when you're trying to figure out, how do I get to scale? How do I think about this next big fundraising hurdle I have to get over? And then you need both at different times in your life cycle as a founder.
Let's go now to core learnings, right? So if you were to look back to your kind of older, younger Keith who is about to start angel investing, right? What are 3 core learnings that you've had from angel investing you would tell him?
You out here learning more about them angels, are you?
First one would be founder first and look for grit. I think times where I've made bad investments have been where, I think this market is really interesting or this problem's really interesting, but I have a couple of doubts about the founder. But the problem's so interesting, I'm going to ignore those doubts. Whereas the best investments I've done sometimes have been ones where I just love the founder so much. And even if I think the way they're approaching this particular market doesn't make sense, I actually know they're going to go through so many iterations. They're going to have to pivot a couple of times. And what matters most is, does this founder have the grit to actually push through all the struggles they're going to hit? And that's been 100% hit rate. Like the high grit founders have been the best investments for me. So that's the number one thing I look for. The number 2 thing I look for, and I've sort of mentioned this a little bit before, is knowing my strengths and where can I turn my experience into evolutionary advantage for a founder. So where can I help a founder who's going to be going through the exact same experiences that I've gone through to get to my successes faster and avoid the mistakes that I made? So I think of angel investing as that sense, you're like paying it forward. And hopefully over time, the founding journey gets better and better and better because you have people behind you who have made mistakes before or who have found the path to success faster. So I think about that as the next thing. So that's the market, again, the problem space, the type of technology that they're working on. That's the second place I look for. Does that fit with my strengths? And then the third thing is, can we find a communication line that works? And again, this goes back to, I want to be on the founder's side. I want to be their support mechanism. I go very quickly now to, how do you like to work with angels? How do you communicate with your team? And do you want to communicate with me in that same way? And I think if I find founders who have a ton of grit, who are focusing somewhere that I know I had experience that can add value, and who are very open with how they want to communicate with me, those are always going to be successful angel relationships. And oftentimes the most successful investing outcomes as well.
100%. And let me zoom into the first point, if that's okay. So do you have any views on solo founders, like, backing solo founders versus co-founders?
I don't have a hard no to solo founders, but I've found that someone that has at least one co-founder, I think I see higher success rates there in the way they build their business. And part of this is because I think if you're a solo founder, you actually need an even stronger angel ecosystem and VC ecosystem around you, because you need someone to bounce ideas off of, to help you carry the load of building this entire business and carrying the weight of that business forward. I think that's always easier if you have a co-founder you trust or co-founders you trust. So I do think solo founders I dig deeper on and I do more due diligence on than co-founders, because I feel like they're going to need more support if they're standing alone than someone that has a co-founder next to them.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think on the one hand, it's kind of proven that having a co-founder really helps on the resilience point, right? The one day you're down, you have your co-founder to pick you up, right? On the other hand, I think sometimes people, on the other side of the spectrum, they tend to brute force a co-founder is never a good thing, right? Especially if you look back, the number one reason why pre-seed companies fail is founder fight, right? So it's quite a nice conundrum, but I would agree with that. Yeah, and for us, I think one thing that we found was very important, and I think especially in the market that's passed now has proven to has treated us very well, is always ask the why, right? What is the reason? Like, what is that obsession? What is the trigger behind the motivation for the founder for building the company they are building, right?
Absolutely.
Any preferences for serial founders versus operators? Do you have any views on that?
It goes back to the experience point. I think you're always going to be more successful if you are encountering problems that you've seen before. And so in that sense, if you're a serial founder, some of the operational aspects of scaling a business from having done it before, even if it failed, to take that to the next step. But I also think a lot of operators have gone through that as well. And so I don't have a problem with operators being founders as long as they're bringing experience to bear. But again, this goes back to grit first. It's like there are times where I've taken a bet on an operator who's a first-time founder and doesn't necessarily have relevant experience, but they have a great why and they have a ton of grit. And then they're going to be successful. But I think for serial founders, they're just going to avoid some of the pitfalls much faster that a first-time founder is going to run into 90% of the time.
Yeah, 100%. And you gotta love, the operator has seen the problem inside, has everything to prove in the world, right? Like natively. But of course, then it's about their capacity to become founders. And, vice versa, the serial founders going through the trodden path. But what is the chip on the shoulder, right? What makes them still hungry to prove, all of what they have? So yeah, 100%.
I have to ask you, Keith, and I love asking VCs when they say this on, on the European VC, which is you say you're founder first. What does that really mean and how do you test for it? Because, it's so, everyone says it, but it's very rare that you get a real, this is what I really look for in them. This is how I test it. This is blah, blah, blah. Could you dive into that a bit?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think two ways I think about that. One is, do I get a sense or do I think I can create a sense of vulnerability? Because I'm an operator angel, right? I'm not a VC angel. And so I want to be a person that they can come to when they have a real serious problem. Like I'm having a fight with my co-founder, or, hey, I made this really big hire and it's going terribly and I don't know what to do about it. I want to be the person that they can come talk to about that. And so do I feel that sense of psychological safety with the founder? Because if I don't feel that, then there's not as much trust there. And I think my value add is going to be lower there. And my sense of trust in that founder is going to be lower as well. So I think that's the number one thing that I test for. And then I also test for what are they asking of me? Do they just want my name on a piece of paper and then to move on? Or are they coming to me because they think I have a very specific thing to add? So in that sense, I always leave time at the end of any founder conversation to say, what questions do you have for me? What can I bring to the table? And the founders that really have good answers there, it's just like interviewing a candidate for a role. You get so much out of just being quiet and letting the founder speak and seeing what they're actually trying to pull out of you. That's where you get a great sense of the type of founder and type of founder relationship you're going to have.
You're saying find the communication line that works as your third core learning. And I would just maybe ask you if you have seen breakdowns of communication where you thought, we could have solved that, earlier on.
Yeah, I think what I've seen, and I'm sure both of you have probably seen this in your investing careers as well, is where a founder says, actually, the way I want to communicate with investors is I'm going to send out a monthly update, and that's going to be my only communication line. And then inevitably, they start to do it every other month or a quarter, and then eventually just dies out, and you sort of have a founder go quiet. That's why, for me, I would much rather be on either a regular email or WhatsApp communication cadence with a founder than be waiting for some sort of regular update, because I feel like it's hard to actually keep that going. And if that update is going out to all of their investors, they're not going to actually want to air out the really big problem they're trying to tackle with, because it's going to affect the way investors are viewing their company. And I want to be the person where they can air out the big problem they're trying to deal with. That's always going to be better one-on-one. So it's what is that one-on-one communication line that I like to look out for?
Yeah, 100%. And what we've seen is also, and I know as an angel investor it might be harder to establish, but there's so much missed opportunity on the connectivity of the different investments you make, right? Like, are there ways in which you can create the conditions for X founder you've backed to be able to connect with Y founder you backed because they have something in common or an issue in common, or one, you can leverage the advice of one that's just been through something recently, right? And, communication can be such a powerful tool to tap into those knowledge networks. And that's something we definitely are kind of looking to professionalize a bit more, for us at least.
Absolutely.
Awesome. So now I will take us to the quickfire round. That means that I'll ask you some questions and challenge you to answer the questions rather quickly. Are you ready, Keith?
I'm ready for it. Let's do it.
First question is, what is the most counterintuitive thing you've learned since you started angel investing?
Founder over market for me.
That was very precise. It's very rare that we get someone being that precise. So thanks a million, Keith. Second question, what would be your top tip to angels wanting to do more international investments?
Be present and embedded in that international ecosystem where you want to do investments. Do people in that ecosystem actually know you? Do you know that ecosystem? You literally physically have to be there, spend time, get to know people if you're going to be in the deal flow. I think there's no substitute for that.
And final question, what advice would you give your 10-year younger self if you only had 30 seconds?
I think take more risks and trust your gut. I think for people that have a certain view of being like a high achiever in their career, it can easy to see the yellow brick path. It's a lot more fun to go off the yellow brick path, I think. And so take more risks. I always tell people to take more risks.
Thanks a million, Keith. This was an awesome episode. I'm super happy you joined us here, and I cannot wait to really just catch up and get to know you more.
Yeah, it is really people like you that make the tech ecosystem better, and whether it's operating or angel investing. So we're lucky to have you. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you both for having me. And Anthony, I know working with people like you makes me a better investor, angel, and operator too. So always happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the SuperAngel Podcast, the go-to podcast for angels backing the next generation of European unicorn founders. If you love our show, do drop us a review, share it with your friends, and join our Angel LP syndicate at EUVC. And if you're an angel listening in and wanting to get closer to the European angel scene, please do not hesitate to reach out to us. We'd love to connect and see how we can play together. And now, some words from our beloved sponsors. How are you currently reporting to your LPs? Is fund administration taking hours? Are you getting lost in spreadsheet version control? Well, Flow solves all of these issues and more, allowing you to unlock the power of your fund's data by consolidating your work streams onto Flow. Book a demo to learn about Flow's portfolio and fund management features and transaction infrastructure at flow.io/VC. flow.io/VC. Investors are turning to new relationships as we continue to face challenges in a downturn. Join Expand North Star to discover Dubai, the UAE, and the rise of the Global South ecosystems. Gain insights on market access opportunities and the latest on ADGM, Mubadala, and Catalyst Partners, as well as how DFDF are transforming the global investment landscape with a $1 billion target for assets under management by the end of 2024. You'll connect with the people driving the UAE's digital economy to grow more than $140 billion in 2031. And Dubai's recently announced ambitious $8.7 trillion economy agenda for the next decade, known as D33. Register now at expandnorthstar.com/EUVC. Vaban from Qatar is the easiest way to launch and run your syndicate. Our end-to-end platform automates your back office so you can focus on the things that matter, supporting the next generation of entrepreneurs and building your network. Angel investors are the fuel to innovation, and we've created the Atom SPV to allow for more deals, more ownership, and less fees. Backed by Qatar, the leading fintech infrastructure company, we'll be with you all from fundraising to exit. Investors on our platform have raised over $2.5 billion in global investments for companies including Revolut, Bolt, and SpaceX.
Been touched by an angel, girl.